an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. Look at that. Wednesday, November the 15th. Halfway through November already. Wow. Welcome in. It's Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network. Had a rather robust and wide-ranging conversation yesterday with friends Barb DiGiulio and Bob Reed. We don't do enough of the roundtables here. They kind of take off. So I think we're going to do more of those in the future. It was fun. And last week, of course, we didn't really get into studio per se. We featured the RCAF Foundation shows that we produced for Remembrance Week. And if you missed them, go back and listen, because it's some fascinating history about Canadian aviation and Toronto and the connection, the direct and historic and emotional connection that the RCAF has with your Toronto Maple Leafs. It's really a cool story. And why does the RCAF choose to hold its Remembrance Day observances at Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Midtown Toronto? Nowhere else in the country. That's where they do it. That's their official Remembrance Day observation for Royal Canadian Air Force. Want to know why? Listen. Some real fun stuff. And also, you'll find out the relationship that Amelia Earhart has with this city of Toronto. What? Yeah, it's cool. She does. Historic female aviator. Although you'll listen to the story and find out, well, you know what? She might have been one of the most popular and well-known, but may not have been the top female aviator of her time. I didn't know there were others, but there were. But she has a very distinct and direct connection with the city of Toronto. So listen for that. Tomorrow on the show, David Schultz is going to join us from Minnesota. He is the professor of constitutional law and political science at Hamline University. And it looks like the on par, the House of Representatives seems to pass more bailout bills to keep the government running than they do anything else in terms of legislation that they pass. There will not be a shutdown. It would appear. It still has to go to the Senate. But that's what preoccupies me. Yesterday I was watching CNN, and there was like not quite a fist fight in the hallways of the legislature, Capitol Hill, between two Republicans. I mean, what the hell? Yeah, that is the state of being. And I've heard this, I don't know if you've heard this word lately, pop up in your news feed. It's called illiberal. Yeah, illiberal. And I'm seeing it more and more and more. And it had been applied to the likes of Orban and Putin, maybe Trump, right? Considering some of the nastiness that's coming out of him lately. But I read a piece out of The Economist last week, and it applies it also to the extreme left cancel culture. And the whole point is, if you're not a member of my tribe, you do not deserve any of the benefits of our society, democracy, whatever it might be. It's fascinating just to look at the tribal nature of our politics. And that's what seems to preoccupy us. So we're going to get into that next week. We'll take a deeper dive on some of that stuff. But this weekend, saw a story that popped up in CBC. And it was talking about international students. And the food bank in Brampton deciding that they were turning students away because they don't have enough food to go around for everybody. And the logic, based on the story that I read, I don't know whether you embrace it or not, but these are students coming from away. They had a certain amount of money and means. They should not be availing themselves of and what was, in air quotes, free food at the food bank. But it raises an interesting question concern, particularly after yesterday, or I guess or earlier this week, the release of the Who's Hungry report at Daily Bread. Spoiler alert, things aren't getting better. 1 in 10, based on this report, of the people who live in Toronto proper avail themselves of the services of a food bank. Neil Hetherington is here. He is the CEO at Daily Bread. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Doing all right. It was a busy day yesterday releasing the report, which, as you said, was not good news. And that was on the heels of the not good news of the of what that independent food bank did in Brampton.
Yeah. Let's talk about that first, because I can see where that was a really difficult conversation. It was a difficult decision. And people will, you know as well as I do, when we were doing the radio show, you'd come on and you'd talk about this, that, and the other thing what the food banks were doing. And inevitably, I would get messages on the text board saying, is there not a means test? Isn't there something where you're kind of tracking these people to see whether or not they're deserving of the food that you're giving out? And so that's out there. So put that in context for me based on what went on in Brampton.
Sure. Well, this is a case in my mind. It's a clear case of blaming the victim. So, instead of saying to that hungry student, we're not going to give you food. Instead of we need to be talking about the policy issues that are resulting in this. So let me back up for a second and just talk about the provincial and the federal policymakers' decisions. So at the provincial level, they've made a choice to underfund universities and colleges so that it's more accessible for Canadians. Okay, so that's their choice. Those international students, spend $37,000 a year more than a Canadian student. And it is a profit center for the colleges and universities, and it offsets the lack of a subsidy. So we have that happening at the provincial level. Then at the federal level, we have an unlimited number of student visas that are issued, and means test for those students that says if they have $10,000, they'll be fine. So $10,000 a year, $833 a month. That's all you need. Come on over to Canada and pay this exorbitant fee for your college education. And so they're set up for failure. I mean, they just by definition, $833, that's a little bit more than what a welfare payment is in Ontario. So, which is $733. So they're set up for failure. And then the food bank, what do they do? The kid's hungry, and does not have the means to be able to procure their right to food. And so what's the food bank supposed to do? They should be feeding that student. At the same time, they should be advocating for a change in policy. Maybe that change in policy includes things like limiting the number of international students and facing the consequences of what that means to colleges and universities where we pay an appropriate amount for our education, or the government subsidizes it more heavily. The means test that is happening before they arrive in Canada. It is, why would we say to anyone, you'll be fine with $833 in the city of Toronto? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you kind of get into that whole notion that the food banks have become ingrained in the fabric of our economy, and it was never intended to do that. But this is where we are. This is an economic indicator. When you start talking about the numbers that you've released in your latest report, that is as reliable an economic indicator as anything that's out there.
Yes, yesterday was the release with telling we had press there, and telling those cameras, telling the city of Toronto, did you know that 1 in 10 it made use of Daily Bread or North York Harvest last year. It's an astonishing number to think that 10% of our population can't afford the food that they need. And what worries me most There's a lot of things that are giving me gray hair, but the thing that is worrying me the most right now is this is while things are good economically. This is while unemployment is low. And so if we don't skirt a recession, if we don't skirt a change in our unemployment numbers, I worry very, very much about what will happen. I was just doing some forecasting, and we model out a year in advance where we think food bank numbers are going to be. And right now we're at 275,000 visits per month. That's up from 60,000 before the pandemic. When you and I first started talking, we were talking about 60,000. Now it's 275,000. We will, I believe, get to north of 400,000 visits in a month in about a year's time. I pray I'm absolutely wrong on that forecast, but I never thought we would get to our forecasted 250,000, and we did.
Yeah, well, again, I think to your credit, and I say this with all due respect, and it's not a backhanded compliment at all, but when the pandemic hit and you and I first started to talk about this, and I suggested it looks like we're going to have a spike initially in this, and you said, well, sure, we're going to have a spike, but it's not going to go away until maybe 2025. It'd be 3 or 4 years that this is going to linger, even though COVID seems to be in the rearview mirror, that this frontline effect on the economy is really going to be felt for years to come. And, we can put an ROI on this as, up and down, whatever. I mean, we throw the number around $33 billion is the cost of poverty, a whole range of things in Ontario. That's pre-pandemic. But just think about, the productivity, about healthcare, about all of the things that are affected because a family doesn't have enough food to put on the table.
It is, and so not only the scale of food insecurity in the city is problematic, but also the depth of it. When we talk about a third are children, and when we talk about a third of food bank clients are going a full day without any food, at least on a monthly basis, and half are skipping meals in order to pay for basics. Then you go to the other, there's so many troubling statistics. I really encourage all listeners to Google Who's Hungry 2023. It's a well-written but devastating report. One of the other troubling things is when a food bank client reveals what their incomes are, what we see is that after paying for rent and utilities, they have about $6.67 on average a day to survive on. So the equivalent of 2 TTC fares. So to get somewhere and back, and that's of course they've got to rely on friends, family, and charity in order to survive. 25% of food bank clients have absolutely nothing after paying their rent and utilities. And every single day, every single month, they are dependent on friends, family, and charity to clothe themselves, for transportation, for food. 25%. It's a horrible report, and behind each of those stats are two things. One is behind each of those stats is a family story, and behind each of those stats is a policy failure by all three levels of government.
Well, break it down even within the 416. 66% food bank visits in Etobicoke, 54 in North York, 36 in Scarborough, 50% in the central Toronto. These are staggering numbers, just even when you start to break it down by areas in the city. I was at your AGM last month. The mayor was there, and Olivia Chow put on a show. And I say that respectfully. She ramped up and amped up the group and the crowd, and the whole point was that you're my boss, make sure you have a loud voice and you tell all those politicians that this is what we need to do. And the room responded accordingly. And the call to action in that meeting, if nothing else, was to make noise. So who's been on your phone the last 24 hours?
Well, who's been on my phone has not been. I haven't had a single reach out to from a politician, but I reached out to every elected official in the city at all three levels of government, and I sent them a copy of the report. I wrote them a letter, every single one of them, so they all got that yesterday. It was sent out earlier in the week, and so we are telling them what is going on. I was pleased. I was pleased that the mayor committed to 65,000 homes to be built. I am pleased that the province has said we're going to build 1.5 million homes by 2031. And I'm pleased that the federal government brought into law the Canada Disability Benefit. But Dave, the thing that really bugs me is not one of those commitments is funded. Not one of them. They are all promises of something that they're going to do, but there's no, right now, there's no funding behind any of them. And so, on this show, I could announce I'm going to be building, 2 million houses by 2035, and I'm really pleased to announce that. And that's the weight that these things have. I mean, and so we are going to push them. They know the numbers, they know the stories, they know it's their electorate, they know affordable housing and affordability are top election issues. So let's collectively help them walk back from the limb that we're all on.
We talked about this last week on our Ontario Politics podcast with John Wright and Keith Leslie. And John Wright made the point that on issues like this, particularly around affordability, there is no coordinated effort. And that's really what we need. And maybe what we learned from COVID, that all three levels of government weren't always in sync, but they were moving in the same direction, speaking the same language with the same mission because there was some urgency around the pandemic. When do we get to a point where all three can finally say, this is a state of emergency? I know we've used the word crisis and not inappropriately here, but if COVID was a state of emergency, then clearly this is a public health state of emergency.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If there were, if 10% of the population didn't have electricity, we would, we would send in the army. We would have that war room. And you're right, we did get together during when COVID happened. We had coordination meetings every single week with the mayor, with all food providers. And we were part of larger networks that were coordinating emergency services. We treated it appropriately as the crisis it was. There was a war room effort, and so I sit back. We're a nonprofit. We're trying our best to be leaders in terms of our research and in terms of our advocacy positions. And we are trying really hard to make levels of government look good by telling them, here's what you got to do if you want to solve this problem. And so I do hope we get back to a coordinated effort. There is a national poverty reduction strategy. As you know, the 2030 project details that well. We're not going to hit the targets in there. There is a national housing strategy. We're not going to hit the targets there. I'd like to see a greater emphasis on the provincial poverty reduction strategy, which emphasizes job creation as the pathway out of poverty. But what our report showed yesterday was that employment is no longer a pathway out of poverty. We saw the fastest growth area in terms of demographics are people who have at least one member of the household working. It used to be that if you go to school, you get a job, you work hard, you'll be fine. You buy a house and a white picket fence. That's not the case anymore. With rents the way they are, with grocery prices the way that they are, it's problematic. And so the poverty reduction strategies need to unfold quickly.
Yeah, you and I've said this before. I think it was easy to sort of other those who were lining up for the food bank. prior to the pandemic. It wasn't something that affected my life. 1 in 10 means that today you're going to run into somebody who needs the food bank. You may not know it, but you're going to see somebody, because if you run into more than 10 people in the course of the next 24 hours, chances are pretty good they or somebody in their family is relying on a food bank.
Yeah.
But do you think that number is underestimated? I mean, I realize that, there's a certain calculation going on there, but your own sense of this, because even when I went to the AGM, it was sort of a late afternoon start when I got there, and there was a significant lineup, young families, moms with kids in tow. It just occurred to me, you see the faces of the people who are in line. Is it, is 1 in 10 optimistic?
Well, that's an interesting question. In the food bank that you were at, it used to be open 4 days a week. Then it was 5, and then it was 6. Now it's 7 days a week, just to process the number of clients that need to access food there. So, is it an underestimate? Most of the research, Val Trasick will tell you that most of the research it is an underestimate. It certainly is not all who are food insecure. There are different levels of food insecurity, and we do not fulfill the need of all of those who are food insecure, nor could we, I don't think. And so those food insecure folks who don't come to the food bank, they're relying on friends and family. They're relying on community meals to a large extent. Those community meals that are really important, where there's the opportunity for folks to get together, to cook together, and socialize, and that is a needed program in our city. There's a lot of loneliness out there, and so those community meals make a huge difference. Anyway, so yes, the bottom line, it's an underestimate. We're not fulfilling the full need. We are doing our best that every single person, we made that commitment in 2020, that every single person, no matter the number of people that come to the food bank, we will make sure there is food for them. And we've been honoring that, and we'll continue to do that.
I don't want to finish on a down note, but to that point, at what point is this no longer sustainable? Because you guys, for all the effort, the money, what was the monthly number that you're spending on food now? It's some stupid, crazy number.
Yeah, the yearly number, we've gone from spending $1.5 million a year on food to $22 million a year on food. It is a stupid number. In terms of sustainability, we do have that commitment to the city that we will be there for the people that need it. But it's not sustainable, and it's not a healthy system to have a parallel system here where somebody's got to go to No Frills for 4 days worth of the food, and then they can get food from the food bank for 3 days of it. That's not efficient. That doesn't make a lot of sense for that individual. I will continue to have hope in the Canada Disability Benefit. It's not funded yet, but over the next few months, we are making a number of trips to Ottawa to remind every MP that 1 million Canadians rely on disability benefits and plans, and that it is extremely important that they fully fund this thing. And so we want to make sure it's in the budget this March, and we're going to do everything we can on that front. We'll continue to ask the community to provide for those in their community that don't have what they need. And it's been challenging, it's been hard, it's tiring, but it's an important mission.
Yeah, and we talked to the minister who's new in the job now, about the Canada Disability Benefit, and that show aired, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, the 2030 Project. And I'll give her credit. I mean, she was committed. She's passionate about the subject. But to your point, it's great to stand in front of the media and say, look, the great intention that we have, this has to get done. We can't afford not to do this, one. But nothing about us without us sort of thing, where they're including that community, those people who live with disability in this country. Do you get a sense that that's actually hitting, like the rubber hitting the road there? Because again, it's easy to say we're going to do this and have this collaborative approach to consultation and development of the regulations around it. There was some skepticism expressed in the course of the series that we did by those who live in the community and those who are advocates. So do you have any sense of where that's going?
Not a great sense. I think they've relied on the consultations that happened prior to the law being put into place. Listen, if we had to, and I know my colleague Talia Bronstein would hate me saying this, but if you had to sacrifice a consultative process for expediency in getting the right amount of money out to those who are disabled who cannot work, I would take the expediency route. It needs to be a thoughtful plan, but there's also the opportunity to refine it after. The fact is that those who rely on provincial disability programs, they do not have the money for their right to food to be realized. It is obscene how little they are provided, and the expectations that are put on them and the burdens that are put on them, and they need to have that disability benefit brought into force forthwith.
Yeah, just for context too, for those of you just kind of catching up on this, it's been a 3-year plus process when that legislation was first introduced. There was an election in there that knocked it off the table and had to come back, and so on. So the thinking is it's taken too long, to your point around expediency already. So get her done. But we'll watch that with interest. Neil, thanks for this, and let us know what we can do.
Absolutely. I'll tell you right now, if you're listening to this, you made it to the end. Thank you for tuning in. Please, like right now, just write any MP, write the Prime Minister, write any MP. You don't even have to put a postage stamp on it or send an email, make a call to your constituency office. Just say, I understand there's this disability benefit. I hope you get it fully funded. Lots of love and hang up.
Well, with all due love, that's good. Neil Hetherington's the CEO at Daily Bread Food Bank. And if you want more details on the Who's Hungry report, it's dailybread.ca, and it is front and center right now. By the way, new feature here. We're going to put this link in the show notes. If you've got a comment and you want to leave us a message that we can include in the show, voicemail, it's better than that. Just a thought on who you called and when you called them and what needs to be done. You want to respond to the show that way, just click on the link in the show notes. And I'm going to warn you right now, we ask you for your name and your email. And the reason we do that is because we really aren't in the business of dealing with trolls and nonsense. If you got something serious to say about the show, click the link. It's real easy. You give me your email, you hit the record button, and you send us your recorded message. And there will be days when that makes sense to just in terms of including it in the show. So just go to the show notes right now if that so engages you. Otherwise, you can find me on social media at Dave Trafford on Facebook, Threads, Twitter, X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Speaking of trolls, but yeah, you can find me there. I got to get a glass of water. All right. By the way, I got to let you know, I had to set an alarm to do this interview this morning, Neil. I haven't had to do that in a few months. Neil Hetherington.
Thank you, David.
At Daily Bread Food Bank. Dave Trafford, this is Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Craig McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.